Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. From the Old Testament to the New Testament, the Bible is full of miraculous acts by people, none more so than Jesus. The New Testament has two similar stories of Jesus' miracle of feeding a multitude of people with his 12 disciples. In one, he feeds 5,000 people, and in the other, he feeds 4,000 people. Despite the similarities, this is not a contradiction, and most definitely not the same literal event being performed twice. The Odyssey, written around the 8th or 7th century BC, is one of two major epic poems attributed to the Greek poet Homer. The poem focuses on the Greek hero Odysseus, or Ulysses as he was known in Roman myths, and his long journey home following the fall of Troy. In the myth, his adventure-filled 10-year journey took him as far away as Egypt and North Africa and the Western Mediterranean, as the displeased sea god Poseidon prevented him from reaching his home. Over the centuries, in each account of a god, they are written about as more powerful and miraculous as the previous god of that era. And with the creation of Jesus, it is no different. We know that the authors of the Gospels had access to these ancient poems, as the reuse of the stories in the same sequential order are clearly evident throughout the Gospels. Also, the pattern of repackaging and elevating God and Jesus as superior to previous pagan gods is consistent across the Old and New Testaments. Odysseus is often compared to Jesus as a sun god. Among scholars, especially Professor Dennis Macdonald, who authored many books about the New Testament and the writings of Homer, the feeding of the multitude in the Gospels is certainly derived from the myths written by Homer. Let's look at two relevant Greek myths and their parallels to the two miracle stories in the New Testament. For those not familiar with the stories, I will briefly summarize them. In Greek mythology, Telemachus, the son of Odysseus, and the goddess Athena arrived by boat on the shore of Philos, ruled by King Nestor. At this particular time, there was a feast to the god Poseidon, and the men were seated in 9 groups, with 500 men in each group. The locals came and greeted Telemachus and Athena and urged them to sit. The king's son makes them comfortable, sitting on a soft fleece, and encourages them to partake of the feast, having wine and food. The king's son said to Athena, "O stranger, now pray to Lord Poseidon, for the feast is his that you have stumbled on here." So both Athena and Telemachus offered prayers. When they roasted the meat, they divided the portions and distributed it amongst the people. In the biblical version in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus sailed to the shore of the Sea of Galilee, where 5,000 men were gathered to greet him. Jesus began to teach the people, and as it drew late, the disciples wanted to send the people back to their homes. Instead, Jesus sat the men in groups of hundreds and 50s and made them comfortable on the green grass rather than on the stones of the shore. Jesus prayed and blessed the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes and distributes it to the 5,000 men to eat. Let's take a closer look at the parallels of this myth of King Nestor's feast and the feeding of the 5,000. Telemachus and Athena sailed and went ashore. In the Bible, Jesus and the disciples sailed and went ashore. They found a great crowd on the beach, 4,500 men. In the Bible, they found a great crowd on the beach, 5,000 men. King Nestor was the shepherd of the people. Jesus pitied the crowd, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. When the crowd saw the strangers, they ran to greet them. The Bible says, When the crowd saw Jesus and the disciples, they ran ahead to greet them. King Nestor's son ordered his guests to sit. Jesus ordered his guests to sit. The men sat in 9 groups of 500. In the biblical version, the men sat in eating groups of hundreds and fifties. Telemachus and Athena were made comfortable and seated on soft fleeces. In the Bible, the men were made comfortable and seated on green grass rather than the stones. King Nestor sacrificed and others prayed. In the Bible, Jesus prayed and broke the bread. They took the meat and passed out the food. Jesus took the loaves and fish and passed them out. In both versions, everyone ate and was filled. In the second Greek myth, Telemachus and King Nestor's son went to Sparta and once again stumbled upon a great feast at the palace of Menelaus, this time a wedding feast. When a slave heard of the arrival of the 2 strangers, he asked Menelaus what he should do with them. Either take care of their horses and invite them in, or send them off to someone else who will entertain them. Menelaus told him to take care of their horses and bring them inside to dine. Telemachus and King Nestor's son were brought bread and meat of all kinds, and they drank from golden goblets. In the biblical version in the Gospels, Jesus is once again located on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, this time on the southern tip in Decapolis. A crowd of 4,000 people were with Jesus and his disciples for 3 days without food. He commanded them to sit down and took 7 loaves of bread and a few fishes, and passed it out amongst the 4,000 people to eat. Let's explore the parallels of this Greek myth and the biblical feeding of the 4,000. Instead of sailing as they did to the first feast, Telemachus and King Nestor's son rowed to Sparta. In the Bible, instead of sailing as they did to the first feast, Jesus and the disciples travelled overland to the lake. A slave wanted to send them on their way. The Bible version, the disciples wanted to send the crowds on their way because it was impossible to buy enough bread. Menelaus refused to send them away unfed. Jesus refused to send the people away unfed. Unlike the first feast, where the diners were all men, at this wedding feast they included women. In the Bible, unlike the first feast, this one apparently included women. The slaves took bread, wine and meat and passed them out. Jesus took bread and fish, and his disciples passed them out. In both versions, everyone ate and was filled. It cannot be accidental that details in the story of King Nestor's feast, not found in the story of Menelaus, appear in the feeding of the 5,000 and not in its twin. Similarly, details in the story of Menelaus not found in the story of Nestor appear in the feeding of the 4,000 and not in the first feast. The most satisfactory explanation is Mark's imitation of the epic poem. The clear evidence that the biblical texts are in no way exclusively true, but rather they are closely related to all the world's other myths, preserved in different forms among all the different cultures on earth, should conclusively demonstrate that there is no room for denigrating the myths or sacred traditions belonging to those other cultures, because they all appear to be closely related and built upon a common worldwide system. The real question is, why are stories outside of the Bible considered fake, a myth, but when these same far-fetched stories are in the Bible, they are considered literal and believable simply because we have been told so. This series will focus on the New Testament story origins as we look at the historicity of the texts and myths that created these fictional stories. Whilst nearly all myths can be proven to have celestial origins, we will start from the myths themselves and the biblical parallels, and how the authors of the Bible used, borrowed, plagiarized, copied, imitated, or however you wish to describe the act, these myths into stories into the Bible. Thank you.